Welcome to the Grayzone. It's Max Blumenthal. Today we're going to talk to German anti-war activist Heinrich Bücker. Heinrich is the founder of the COOP Anti-War Cafe in Berlin, which actually hosted me back in 2014 when my talk on Israel's war on Gaza was canceled by Rosa Luxemburg's Stiftung under pressure from the Israel lobby. Heinrich is a dedicated activist against US imperialism and Germany's role in it. And he was recently summoned by the German state because of statements he made criticizing Germany's role in the Ukraine proxy war, and specifically Germany's military aid for state-backed Ukrainian neo-Nazi battalions like the Azov Regiment. Heinrich now faces jail time, 40 days in prison or a 4,000 euro fine. His prosecution is consistent with those faced by other people we've interviewed here at the Grayzone, like Alina Lipp, the German independent journalist who has been facing prosecution by the German state and whose bank accounts have been seized by German prosecutors simply for reporting the other side from the Donbass region of Ukraine. New German speech codes have been implemented, banning the display of the letter Z, the display of the St. George's Cross, the Soviet flag, and the Russian flag. And 1,400 German police officers were deployed to the large anti-war rally at Brandenburg Gate on February 25th to enforce those speech codes. And so Heinrich and his experience is consistent with Germany's interpretation of a kind of wartime democracy. And so I want to welcome Heinrich today onto the Grayzone to discuss his prosecution and his work challenging the Ukraine proxy war. Welcome, Heinrich.
Thank you very much, Max, for inviting me on the show, and I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I just have to correct you.
Yeah.
This 4,000 euro fine is not correct. It was actually 2,000 euros, and now they have actually we kind of we replied to that. We are going now to a court. I have the next. The court is going on at the end of April. Actually, I have received a letter recently, and so the fine is actually 2,000 euros, and now it's going to court. And also, I have to say that here in Germany we have altogether like more than 150 cases already that are according to what you mentioned with the letter Z and other kind of statements people made, and people have been accused by the police, or there are some cases already also going to court. There have been searches and all kind of repressions going on, and so I'm not the only one who is being threatened by the state authorities. It's like a whole system of repression that is going on, and recently they have also reached out against the Russian House of Culture here in Berlin that is connected to the foreign ministry in Russia, and they try to imply some restrictions on them based on this sanction law that is enforced now here in Germany as well. So they try to stop them from taking any, selling any tickets and generating some income. So it's like an outrageous situation here in Germany, you're right.
Well, let's talk about your prosecution. What happened? What triggered it? My understanding is you essentially criticized Germany giving taxpayer money to Ukraine that could be used to sponsor the neo-Nazi Azov regiment. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, back in June of last year, I was invited by the Berlin Friedenskoordination to give a speech at the Soviet Memorial in Treptower Park here in Berlin, where thousands of Soviet soldiers from the Red Army are buried, and there's a huge memorial there. And we had a little event there with a couple of speakers, like 5 or 6 speakers were there, and I gave a speech it was on the anniversary of the Unternehmen Barbarossa, when in 1941 the Wehrmacht, the fascist German army, attacked the Soviet Union, and I mentioned all these cases of Nazi collaboration that is going on nowadays, and I accused the German government basically to support these right-wing forces in the Ukraine, and mentioned a couple of cases that are also very well documented on a US website called forward.com. You can look it up yourself.
Yeah, Forward is the oldest Jewish newspaper in America, Der
Right.
Vorwärts, and it was a Yiddish newspaper started in New York. So this is not exactly a anti-Semitic publication.
No, not at all. And they actually, I mean, they are also somewhat anti-Russian now.
Yes.
On the top of it, but they also mentioned all these monuments and avenues and places that have been inaugurated in the last years, starting from 2014. And I listed a couple of examples there of all these monuments that have been put in the Ukraine there, and especially I think the most scandalous event is that at the outskirts of Kiev there's a monument called Babi Jar, where the Nazis in the single most drastic massacre killed 30,000 Jews in just 2 days by shooting them and pushing them in this place there down. And actually the Bandera supporters that are present in all structures in the Ukraine nowadays and are getting financial and militarily supported by the US government, by the German governments, and by many NATO states. They actually helped the Nazis back then to bring the Jewish people to this place to be shot there. And Bandera, he is buried here in Munich. A lot of his followers are based there after they fled the Ukraine when the Red Army took over. And the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany, the former Ukrainian ambassador, Andrei Melnik, he actually is adoring this Bandera, and he went to his gravesite where he's laying at this cemetery in Munich, and he laid down flowers there, and he actually posted that event on Facebook, and this is, I think, just outrageous. And recently he was on a podcast run by a kind of mainstreamish German journalist Thilo Jung, who runs a podcast called Jung und Naiv.
Yeah.
And he kind of he's like anti-fascist, you have to say. He's not supporting any kind of Nazism. So he kind of trapped this ambassador in the middle of his show. After like 1 hour, he kind of started to ask him these very serious questions. What are you thinking about Bandera? Why he supports them? Why he's not against him? And this Melnik did some very strange and crazy statements there, that he did not want to accept that Bandera was a fascist, he said, and that he is like still supporting him, that he is considered a hero in the Ukraine and by many people, which is a fact. And so basically he kind of put that out there, and Melnik kind of did disastrous comments to his questions.
Israel, der Staat Israel,
Ja,
dass
wir haben-
800.000
ja.
Juden auch von Banderas Truppen
Also
und Bandera
Israel,
Denken
was
Sie
heißt,
sich das aus?
ich weiß nicht, was sie sich ausdenken, aber wir reden über Bandera, ja? Und wir reden über
Und die
Bandera.
ganze Welt erkennt an, dass Bandera an der Ermordung von 100.000 Juden beteiligt ist.
Nein, das stimmt
Außer
nicht.
die Ukraine.
Es gibt keine Belege, dass Bandera-Truppen Hunderttausende Juden ermordet haben. Es gibt keine Belege. Das ist diese Narrative, dass die Russen bis heute durchsetzen und das in Deutschland und auch in Polen und in Israel auch unterstützt.
Which led then to the fact that he was kicked out of Germany. But unfortunately he was kicked out, but he kind of made it into a deputy foreign minister now back in Kiev. And so this is all very outrageous. I put up all these points in my speech there in June 22, and I got then accused by a German lawyer who was working here in Berlin for a big law house, Ernst & Young. And he went to the police, accused me of spreading propaganda by the Kremlin, and I would be a mouthpiece of Russian propaganda and media, and I would disturb kind of the public order. And so the prosecutor then sent this case to the Amtsgericht Tiergarten, which is a lower court here in Berlin. And they actually came up with this 2,000 euros punishing me, which we kind of, I got a lawyer now with some friends here, and he kind of rejected that. And now the case is going to the court at the end of April.
And the language that the German state prosecutors have used is that the statements you made about these neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine have the, quote, potential to shake confidence in legal certainty and incite the mental climate of the population. How do you interpret that language? And is this related to new speech codes that have been implemented since the February 2022 start of the proxy war?
Yeah, I think so. Although this kind of mood was already there before that, but I think since the war started, which is called like an aggressive war attacking the Ukraine in official language, non-stop in the German media, it's this is like the new speech, and they blend out also numerous reports that were present in the mainstream before that war actually started. Because they mentioned these right-wingers in the Ukraine and these neo-fascists and their policies and their influence on the military, on the secret service quite often in talk shows, in kind of documentaries. And now since 24th of February 22, this is completely blended out. They don't talk about this anymore. They only go on about this post-criminal activity of Putin, who they compare to Hitler, and it's extremely strange. Last night I was watching like kind of a very popular talk show here, and they actually mentioned this massacre of the German Wehrmacht in Babi Jar, in this place on the outskirts of Kiev, but they put it in a different context. They kind of blamed the Nazis for doing these crimes, but then they kind of left out who was associated with them, who brought the people to that place to being shot by the Nazis. They blended that out and they turned it into this kind of narrative of Russians being to be compared to this criminal behavior of the German Wehrmacht in the 40s. So that is what they always do. They don't hiding the fact that the Nazis committed crimes. They call them out. They are going against them very strong, but they always compare to the Russian army and their activities in the Ukraine and to their supposed massacres and rapes of women and all these kind of BS they give to the German public non-stop 24/7. And the thing is that at the same time alternative media is being hampered. They're like kind of being threatened, and the Russian channels are completely cut off. You don't find them online anymore unless you have some certain links that go around, but altogether it's like the media is like very biased and very one-sided.
Well, I remember from my time in Germany, from the moment I arrived, to do a series of talks on my reporting from inside the Gaza Strip, where essentially the German state has cited the Holocaust as moral justification for supporting Israel's siege on Gaza. I was labeled an anti-Semite as a Jew on the front page of Berliner Morgenpost, and other German publications joined in, and it was shocking how disciplined the German media was in pumping out one single message from left to right without almost any exception. How has German media treated this issue of Nazism in Ukraine, where, for example, the Ukrainian parliament has issued official statements supporting Stepan Bandera as a national hero year after year? And how have they responded to your prosecution for discussing this issue, which should seem to relate to Germany's attempt to deal with the memory of the Holocaust?
Yeah, there's almost no mention of this in the mainstream media. Just also, but beforehand, I would to mention also that one guy yesterday on that talk show I mentioned was Jan van Aken. He's a member of the Left Party, and he's also a member of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung that kind of banned you from speaking there at the Volksbühne last time you were here in Berlin.
Yeah.
And he kind of came out also, I mean, he came out against the weapon delivery to Ukraine. He very much was against that. That would escalate the war. But he was also like very Russophobic and very much against for distrusting Putin and the whole thing, you know. Then on my case, I mean, there has been and that goes for large parts of the left party. There are only very few people now in the left party who have like sort of different opinions on this. But they're also always talking about the war of aggression against Ukraine. That seems to be like kind of an agreement even for these progressive forces in the left party that they use when they talk about that for whatever reason, I don't know. About the media here in Germany, they haven't been mentioned my case at all so far, at least. The only reaction has been media in the Junge Welt, for example, this left daily newspaper that is very is kind of a paper for a group of leftists that are also sometimes a little bit have some strange point of views, but
Like
basically
the anti-Deutsch paper, right?
No, it's not an anti-Deutsche paper. It's like it's actually very pro-Russian in general, but they have like certain voices in there who kind of mention different issues sometimes, which maybe I don't support so much. But in general, they have like a very pro-Russian stance. Then you have the UZ, that is the weekly newspaper of the German Communist Party, the DKP, that is also like pretty much very strong pro-Russian and pro-Chinese. And then you have a couple of blogs who write about it. And I had interviews, for example, I had the Russian-speaking Russian channel #1 here at my war cafe. I had the Chinese TV there, they did a thing. I had Russia Today Germany, they also reported twice now on the case, and some other things like then in the US there has been quite a good response also. So it's being out in the open, but not in the mainstream media, not altogether. They don't mention it, and I almost suspect they will not do it in the future too. So that's the situation here in Germany. And then also you mentioned the protest by Sarah Wagenknecht and Alice Schwarzer like last, I think it was the 25th. That was also, I would say, I supported. They had brought out this manifesto for peace, which I signed with a lot of pain, to be honest, because it's also in parts very Russophobic, I would say. But then again, they at least bring out a new movement, and people come from all kinds of different backgrounds to be there. We, for example, we have a weekly event. It's called Frente Unido America Latina at the Brandenburg Gate, where we show solidarity with Latin American movements, and we have some people from the Communist Party in Chile, in Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua coming there to speak. And we have always this banners also bringing there that are pro-Russian and support Russia, and we always do that in our speeches too. So we were there also at the Brandenburg Gate, laying out our banners there in the middle of the street. The DKP, the German Communist Party, that did not sign the statement by Sarah, they were also present there in front of the Soviet tanks at this one memorial there. And you had different people from different backgrounds voicing their opposition to this main demand to stop weapons deliveries to the Ukraine. And I think for that reason I always argue to kind of try to support these people to pull off these events, but at the same time we should voice our own opinions about the manifesto and about the whole situation. And I think then this might be really the beginning of a new peace movement in Germany. I'm not too sure about it, but as a matter of fact, I think in Germany you have millions of people who are pro-Russian. It's not the majority of the population, but there are millions. We are many. We are not weak. We are a movement here. But the main problem is that these events that take place, and they take place mostly in the east of the country, are sometimes influenced and sometimes led by people who are affiliated or maybe in sympathy with the Libertarian Party here, the AfD, Alternative for Germany is called, who are like also sometimes have crazy anti-migration statements and whatever, but in large parts I think in large parts they're actually honestly pro-Russian. And a lot of people in the East especially, they're desperate, they don't know what to do, they don't know who to vote for, and so they vote for this party. And because the left in general terms failed in this issue, they don't have any statement out, and nobody can support anything in writing by signing anything. So in a way Sarah Wagenknecht and this Alice Schwarzer, they kind of jumped in that place, put out this manifesto which has been signed now by I think almost 800,000 people, but it's also not really a good statement. I think it's really accusing the Russians of all kinds of dirty things. I don't think it's good. So we are also at the moment planning to bring out some other statement that is led by left forces up front, like initial signers, and then call for people to sign it without party affiliation. And I hope that we could get the same amount of signers, or maybe even more, because I think if you speak Tacheles, how the Yiddish would say, you know, if you really speak in solidarity with Russia, if you stress the fact that this war that Russia started in February was provoked, there was a provocation just before, the weeks before, there was more aggression towards the Donbas republics, more shelling of the civilian neighborhoods there. So Russia did not have any other chance, in my strong belief, than to go and help these people and to wage a war that I would call a defensive war. And I think you cannot put all wars on the same level. You have to realize the fact that there are sometimes wars that are defensive, and they are fought for justice and for freedom and for, like the Red Army when they came to Berlin, that was a just war. That was a war that was not criminal. Although some people here, even in the peace movement, they call it, they put all wars on the same level. They all say all wars are bad. Okay, wars are never good, but let's face it, some wars are more justified than other wars. And I think what the NATO and the Germans especially also are supporting here is pure aggression, and it's based on horrible Russophobia, and we should all stand up and reject this policy that is going on in the West.
Well, Olaf Scholz, like all other NATO leaders, has said that the Western public needs to support Ukraine because it is defending democracy. I think what's happening to you contradicts those statements that we constantly hear about this great war for democracy. How do Germans understand free speech? I know you have no free speech legal protections like we have in the United States, but how do they understand free speech since the implementation of these new codes? How do people who are campaigning against the war know what to say and what not to say? And does the state have simply arbitrary justification for prosecuting anyone that it wants?
Yeah, I would think for the time being they pick out certain people who are maybe more prominent than others to apply these laws that are basically could be also applied to anyone who is saying stuff like that. But I must also say that in general you can still speak out freely. That is I mean, it's to a certain extent there's still something called democracy going on here. For example, you can do events in front of this landmark Brandenburg Gate, right in front of the US Embassy, and you can say all kinds of things there. Freely, they maybe control your banners, they sometimes come and take pictures, they maybe this Sarah Wagenknecht events, they go against the Soviet flags or against certain flags of the Donbas republics. You cannot show them. But in general, I think you can still say pretty much anything you want, I have the feeling, but that might change also in the future. And yeah, and then they pick out certain people who are maybe saying it more loud than others, or I don't know what kind of standards they apply there to shut down free speech. But in general, I think it's still pretty much going okay at the moment, you know. That's just my take.
And do you think the German public, the mainstream German public that initially supported the war, or reflexively supports the war and trusts German corporate and mainstream media, is becoming exhausted or more critical of the war and have, well, I would just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I run this cafe there, this anti-war cafe. I have a lot of customers, tourists, and all kinds of people passing by there. And I also have a lot of activists and peace activists and people I worked together with in the past. And it's like pretty outrageous. A lot of them are against Russia, you know. They kind of hate Putin. They tell me all kinds of things why they think I should call the thing like a war cafe or something like that, you know. But I engage them, I discuss with them, I don't kick them out, I try to keep in conversation with them, in discussions. But it's like pretty depressing to see that even in the peace movement, in the left movement, you have a lot of people supporting the war, or supporting at least the idea that Russia is like evil and doing bad things, you know. In general, I think the mood is a little bit, the people are getting a little bit more tired of the whole thing because it's coming maybe too intense. It's already for too long going on. So I feel that some more people are turning away from this thing. But then again, I mean, it depends on what kind of media bubble you're living in. If you listen all the time to these mainstream talk shows, that even me, when I listen for a couple of hours these mainstream channels, which I do, then also you start kind of doubting yourself a little bit. Is your view correct? You know, it's because it's very intense, it's very emotional, and it's very charged. So you can really understand why people fall for that propaganda. They might not be all bad people in the first place, but they get fed this thing the whole time non-stop.
Yeah.
Then on the other side you have this bubbles of alternative media that is also some people, they don't watch mainstream anymore, they watch only YouTube or whatever channels, and there's also sometimes going on like a little bit over the top narrative, for example in this anti-vaxxer movement, that I'm a little bit, I mean I'm also a skeptic myself. I have not been vaccinated, my wife has, her mother has been several times, nothing happened to them, but I think some of these guys are very much over the top. They have all these conspiracies that this is like a worldwide conspiracy. The Russians and the Chinese, they're involved in it, and in all this kind of, I think, outrageous stuff. They compare sometimes with things related to the Holocaust. They think people will die, many of them later on and stuff. I don't support these ideas, but then again, I'm also somewhat skeptical to these Western vaccines because I think they have not been tested enough and they are sold for these outrageous prices. And but it all depends. Coming back to these narratives, you have certain bubbles where people kind of tend to listen to the content, and then they kind of get very much influenced by these stories that are told there. So there's propaganda on many sides, but I'm trusting, for example, the Russian propaganda, if you want to call it that way, and the Chinese propaganda, because I think it's honest, it's clear, it's not lying, and it's based on facts. And that is missing out sometimes also with other bubbles, you know. So
Well, it's certainly different. What we get from Russian or Chinese state media in English is far different from what their domestic populations receive, and they put more of an effort into appearing objective, or at least making it palatable to a Western public that's naturally suspicious of those media. And in that respect, it's different than the media, our own domestic corporate media, which is just engaged in this thuggish propaganda campaign to wage a psychological blitzkrieg in support of the Ukraine proxy war, or whatever the current thing is. I mean, before this, there was the COVID propaganda blitzkrieg, which we're still just unpacking. What about Nord Stream? Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, was just here in the US. It was a very low-key visit, no public appearances with Biden. I guess both could have gone off script, especially Biden. But there's the whole issue of the US bombing the Nord Stream pipeline, attacking Germany's critical infrastructure, as Seymour Hersh reported. Has this broken through to the German public? Is the German public concerned about this? About Seymour Hersh's story, or about the reality of Nord Stream? Is there pressure for a serious investigation into this attack? And is there a wider concern about energy shortages?
yeah, the energy shortage, I think we had a mild winter. It's not as bad as some people expected it to be, but we will see how next winter comes along. Prices are outrageous. They have a lot of problems with these LNG terminals coming up, and all these questions are like discussed and are present. About the Nord Stream 2, okay, this was like a terrorist attack, same like 9/11 or 3/11 and all these other things that happened before, and I also was very much questioning in the past. This one is okay. The one thing is, this one string of Nord Stream 2 was not blown up, which
Yeah.
some people even say that there might have been some insiders who kind of tried to sabotage the inside job, so to speak, so that this one pipeline is still intact. But altogether, it's a terrorist attack against the German infrastructure. There has been a lot of questioning here in Germany under the table in certain media outlets too, like in the Junge Welt. I talked about this left weekly daily newspaper, and the UZ, in some blogs, sure, they talk about it, and a lot of people basically think that this is something very fishy, and they kind of suspect also who is behind it, but nobody wants to question it too openly, and the mainstream media is maybe also not talking about it, although there's one paper here in Berlin, it's called Berliner Zeitung, it's basically also a mainstream paper. They swing back and forth on this Russian question too. Sometimes they give a little bit more weight to the side that is supporting maybe the Russian narrative. Sometimes they go the other way, maybe to kind of stay in the stream a little bit. But they actually questioned this thing also quite heavily. And also,
Yeah.
on a different note, they did a very lengthy interview with Roger Waters, who also is I think, very important for our movement. And I have been working together with him on some international petitions I put here on my website that is called berlingegenkrieg.de. And he signed a couple of statements there, and now he is being cancelled in Frankfurt, maybe here in Berlin as well, and he has been very anti-Russian in the beginning, but now he kind of pulled back on that narrative, and he almost says that Putin is not, before he called him a gangster, but now he kind of backed off from that statement. He has an argument with Zelensky and one Ukrainian girl that is saying there are no Nazis in the Ukraine. So he's like also, I think, very important because he does very influential shows in the US, and now he's planning to come to Europe soon. And this Berliner Zeitung did a very good interview with him, I think. And he has been also very much on this cause for Palestine and very critical of the Zionist politics of Israel, and I think he's a very important voice for the movement, and he has millions of followers on Twitter. So I think he's very influential in these questions.
Yeah.
And he also took a position on the Syrian war, where he kind of rejected one statement from these guys from the White Helmets on stage, and I think in that respect he's very good. So you have in the mainstream some papers who are kind of put this issue up about the Nord Stream and these other questions. So we will see.
Well, you, Heinrich, are still facing this charge of 40 days in prison or €2,000 fine. What are your plans? Will you pay the fine if you're sentenced, or will you go to prison?
No, I haven't paid this fine. Anyway, maybe I don't know how to say it in Germany. In English, we have rejected it basically. So it's like going to the next stage now, to this court case.
It's like an appeal.
It's an appeal. We have appealed it, and so I'm planning to go against it as long as they don't drop the case, because I think I don't care. I think the truth has to be told. I don't think my lawyer argues that I don't have to fear prison. I don't know, because I have been not punished before in a criminal case. So I don't know how far this would go, but probably it would end up with a fine, I guess. But I think we want to go against it the whole way, and I will take some other lawyers also for advice, and we will not stop. I will not accept that Berlin, and I think Berlin is very fundamentally involved in this war, because if the Germans would say no, this thing would stop at least for a short while. But the Germans, all these parties are like basically from the Second World War onwards, via Adenauer, via Globke, via von Gehlen, via von Kiesinger, the whole police, part of the police, the criminal police, the justice system, have been always infiltrated by these Nazi guys. and have been pulled off a very anti-communist stance the whole time, maybe except Willy Brandt and Egon Bahr, who are members of the SPD, and now Schröder, who also rejected to step out of Gazprom, a company. But the rest of it, they're all in it. They're all in it and they're all involved, and they could all say no at any moment. There might be some blackmailing, but still they could say no. So I think I very staunchly reject the argument that Germany is, okay, it might be a vassal state, but it's very active. So, okay, that is the story about the German government that could stop that at any moment. And I think, especially here in Berlin, as Germans, in this capital of Berlin, that has been it's now the capital of reunited Germany, because there were some deals demanded by Gorbachev in 1991 when he accepted the demand of the German people to live in a reunited country. But the deals attached to this question was the NATO will not move to the east 1 inch. 1 inch. And since then there have been 14 countries or 13 states who joined the NATO. And this is against all deals that were set up at that time. You can listen it on YouTube and in some audio files. It's like documented. They just didn't sign it, but who cares about signing documents nowadays? Nobody does. So that was a deal. Now we are reunited, and we are supporting this policy from Berlin, working together with these Nazi collaborators in the Second World War in 1940-41, especially when we attacked the Soviet Union, being guilty to have killed up to 25 or I don't know how many million citizens of the Soviet Union, destroying hundreds of cities, thousands of villages, destroying the whole infrastructure there. And now here in Berlin we say Russia should lose this war. This is crazy. The Germans should not say anything. They don't have a deal to say anything to Russia. And I think that has to be countered by people. I'm not the only one. Many people are doing this, and we have to pull them together. The secret is now to start a new movement of people who are openly opposing this policy, because many people don't know how many we are. We are many. We are many, many people here in Germany. And I think we have to reject that policy, and many people are willing to do that. And they cannot throw us all in jail. They cannot punish us all. I don't know how this thing is going to end, but my feeling is they will not attack Russia or China directly, but they will go on with this war. This Russophobia will go on for quite some time, and we are living here in Germany in a very, very bad situation. But I think we should speak up. We should say not in our name. We should say something that is opposing this policy, because it's very immoral, it's very ugly, it's very eklig, how you say here in German language. You know, it's like outrageous for these people to support Nazism and to use Slava Ukraini, this greeting in German parliament. Scholz is traveling to Zelensky to visit him in Kiev. He's ending his press conference with this saying, Slava Ukraini. This is outrageous. These guys are basically, I don't know, you might call them Nazi sympathizers or something. It's outrageous.
And your prosecution is consistent with the outrageous atmosphere that's fallen on us across the Atlantic. So Heinrich Bücker, founder of the Co-op Anti-War Cafe in Berlin, good luck with your legal challenge, and thanks for talking to us here at the Grayzone.
Thank you very much, Max. Thank you.